The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Mitchell Turner's ranch house on a scorching August afternoon in 1882. And when the door swung open, a young woman emerged wearing a blue traveling dress that had seen better days, clutching a worn carpetbag and looking utterly terrified as her dark eyes scanned the dusty Colorado landscape outside Durango. Mitchell had been standing on his porch for the better part of an hour, hat in hand, rehearsing what he would say when his mail-order bride arrived. He had written to the agency 6 months ago, lonely beyond measure after 5 years of working his cattle ranch alone. The correspondence had been brief and formal. Her name was Bianca Novelli. She was 22 years old. She was coming from Italy. What the agency had failed to mention, what had somehow been lost in all those letters and arrangements, was that she spoke not a single word of English. He realized this the moment he stepped forward to greet her, and she responded to his carefully prepared greeting with a flood of rapid Italian, her hands moving expressively as tears began to stream down her dust-covered cheeks. Mitchell stood there, his own words dying in his throat, watching this beautiful stranger who had traveled thousands of miles to marry him, and he had no way to tell her that everything would be all right. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Pete, cleared his throat. "She your bride, Turner?" "Yes," Mitchell managed, though his mind was reeling. "Well, she don't speak a lick of English far as I can tell. Been trying to ask her questions the whole way from Denver, just talks in that foreign tongue." Pete handed down a small trunk. "Good luck to you." As the stagecoach pulled away, Mitchell and Bianca stood facing each other in the late afternoon sun. She was shorter than he had imagined, barely reaching his shoulder, with dark hair pinned up beneath a simple hat and olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean origins. Her eyes, though red from crying, were a deep brown that seemed to hold both fear and determination. She was pretty, he realized with a start, far prettier than the photograph she had sent, which had shown a solemn-faced woman staring stiffly at the camera. Mitchell gestured toward the house, picking up her trunk with one hand. "Come inside," he said slowly, knowing she would not understand but hoping his tone would convey welcome. "You must be tired, hungry." Bianca followed him hesitantly, her carpetbag clutched tightly against her chest. The ranch house was modest but well-maintained, a 2-story structure Mitchell had built himself over the years. Inside, the main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy wooden table in the center. Everything was clean but sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and saw no point in decoration. He set her trunk down and gestured to the table. "Sit, please." She remained standing, speaking again in Italian, her voice rising with what sounded like questions. Mitchell caught the word spasare repeated several times, though he had no idea what it meant. He held up his hands in a calming gesture, then pointed to himself. "Mitchell," he said clearly. "Mitchell Turner." Understanding flickered across her face. She pointed to herself. "Bianca." Bianca Novelli. It was a start. Mitchell moved to the stove, where he had a pot of stew simmering, anticipating her arrival. He ladled some into a bowl and brought it to the table with a spoon and a chunk of bread. Bianca finally sat, eyeing the food warily before her hunger apparently overcame her caution. She ate slowly at first, then more quickly, and Mitchell realized she must have been surviving on very little during her journey. He sat across from her, watching as she finished the bowl. When she looked up, some of the fear had left her eyes, replaced by exhaustion. She spoke again, softer now, and though he understood nothing, he heard the question in her tone. Mitchell stood and gestured for her to follow. He led her upstairs, where there were 2 bedrooms. He had spent the previous week cleaning the smaller room thoroughly, putting fresh linens on the bed, even picking wildflowers and placing them in a jar on the windowsill. He opened the door and stepped back, indicating that this room was hers. Bianca entered slowly, looking around at the simple furnishings with the bed, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. She turned to him with surprise, speaking rapidly and gesturing between the room and herself. Mitchell understood she had expected something different, perhaps that they would immediately share a room as husband and wife. He felt heat rise to his face. "You need time," he said, knowing she could not understand his words but hoping she would understand his intent. "We need time to know each other." He pointed to the room, then to her, then back toward the door. "This is yours, for now." Something in his expression must have conveyed his meaning because she nodded slowly, relief washing over her features. She said something that sounded like gratitude, and Mitchell nodded in return before retreating downstairs, his heart pounding. What had he done? He had sent for a bride, yes, but he had imagined someone he could talk to, someone who could help run the ranch and ease the loneliness that had become a constant ache in his chest. How could they build a life together when they could not even speak to one another? That first night, Mitchell barely slept. He lay in his own bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house, the creaking floorboards as Bianca moved around her room, the soft sounds that might have been crying. He stared at the ceiling, wondering if he should take her back to town, see if there was someone who spoke Italian, or send her back to wherever she came from. But when morning came and he went downstairs, he found Bianca already in the kitchen. She had somehow figured out how to work the stove and had made coffee, strong and dark in a way he had never tasted before. She handed him a cup with a tentative smile, and Mitchell knew he could not send her away. She was here. She had traveled so far, and there was something in her eyes that spoke of the same loneliness he felt. They would find a way. The first weeks were an exercise in frustration and improvisation. Mitchell tried to run his ranch while also attempting to communicate basic needs and information to Bianca. He would gesture wildly, trying to explain that he needed to check on the cattle in the north pasture or repair a fence line. She would nod, sometimes understanding, sometimes looking completely baffled. Bianca, for her part, threw herself into making the house a home. She scrubbed and organized, rearranged the kitchen to her liking, and began cooking meals that were unlike anything Mitchell had ever tasted. Rich tomato sauces, fresh pasta she made by hand, bread that was crusty on the outside and soft within. He would watch her work, amazed at her skill, and try to express his appreciation through smiles and emphatic nodding. They developed a rudimentary system of communication through gestures and drawings. When Mitchell needed to explain something, he would sketch it out on paper. When Bianca wanted to ask about something, she would point and wait for him to provide the English word. Slowly, painfully slowly, they began to understand each other in the most basic ways, but Mitchell wanted more. He wanted to know her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. He wanted to tell her about his own life, about how he had come west after his parents died, about the years of hard work building this ranch from nothing. He wanted to ask why she had left Italy, what had driven her to become a mail-order bride to a stranger in a foreign land. 3 weeks after her arrival, Mitchell made a decision. He rode into Durango and went to the general store where the owner, a man named William Garrett, greeted him warmly. "How's the new bride settling in?" William asked with a grin. "She does not speak English," Mitchell said bluntly. "Do you have any books? Anything that might help me learn Italian?" William's eyebrows rose. "You are going to learn Italian. Most men would expect the wife to learn English." "She will learn English too," Mitchell said. "But I need to be able to speak with her. I need to understand her." "Can you help me or not?" William scratched his chin thoughtfully. I do not have any Italian books, but I can order some from Denver. Might take a few weeks to arrive. Order whatever you can find, Mitchell said. Language books, dictionaries, anything. He also stopped by the small church where Father Miguel, a Spanish priest, served the local community. Mitchell explained his situation, and the priest listened with sympathy. Spanish and Italian are similar, Father Miguel said. Not the same, but similar enough that I might be able to help a little. Why do you not bring your bride to Sunday service? Afterwards, I could work with both of you. Mitchell agreed gratefully, and the following Sunday, he and Bianca made the journey to town in his wagon. Bianca had been nervous about leaving the ranch, but when she saw the church, something in her seemed to ease. She crossed herself at the door and slipped into a pew with obvious relief. After the service, Father Miguel spoke with them in his office. He tried speaking Spanish to Bianca, and while she did not fully understand, there was enough similarity that they could communicate basic ideas. Through the priest, Mitchell learned that Bianca's parents had died when she was 19, that she had an older brother who had his own family and could not support her, and that becoming a mail-order bride had seemed like her only option for a new life. She wants to know if you are angry that she cannot speak English, Father Miguel translated. She says the agency promised to teach her before she left, but they did not. Mitchell looked at Bianca, who sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes downcast. He reached across the space between them and gently touched her hand, waiting until she looked up at him. Tell her I am not angry, he said to Father Miguel. Tell her I am learning Italian so we can speak together. Tell her I want to know her, to truly know her. As the priest translated, Bianca's eyes filled with tears. She spoke rapidly in response, and Father Miguel smiled. She says you are a good man. She says she will work very hard to learn English, and she is grateful you are trying to meet her halfway. On the ride home, there was a new ease between them. Bianca sat closer to Mitchell on the wagon bench, and when he pointed out landmarks, she listened attentively, repeating the English words he offered. When they passed a meadow filled with late summer wildflowers, she said something wistful in Italian, and though Mitchell did not understand the words, he understood the emotion. He pulled the wagon to a stop. Would you like to pick some flowers? She looked at him questioningly, and he gestured toward the meadow, making a motion like picking flowers. Her face brightened, and she nodded eagerly. They climbed down from the wagon, and Bianca moved through the flowers like a child, gathering an armful of purple asters and golden black-eyed Susans. Mitchell stood watching her, captivated by her joy in this simple thing. When she returned to him, her arms full of blooms, she was smiling genuinely for the first time since her arrival. She held out a single purple aster to him, and he took it, tucking it carefully into his shirt pocket. Something passed between them in that moment, something that did not require words. The books arrived from Denver 5 weeks after Mitchell had ordered them. There were 3: an Italian-English dictionary, a basic grammar book, and a collection of simple stories in Italian with English translations. Mitchell began studying every night after the ranch work was done, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp burning late, poring over verb conjugations and vocabulary lists. Bianca would sit with him, working on her own English lessons. Mitchell had bought her a primer meant for children, and though she seemed embarrassed by it at first, she applied herself diligently. They would quiz each other, pointing at objects around the house and naming them in both languages: table, tavolo, chair, sedia, window, finestra. Mitchell discovered he had a decent aptitude for languages, perhaps because he was so motivated. He started with simple phrases. Come stai, how are you? Benny Grazy, fine, thank you. Buon giorno, good morning. Buonanotte, good night. The first time he spoke a full sentence to her in Italian, asking if she would like more coffee at breakfast, Bianca dropped her spoon in surprise. Then she laughed, a sound of pure delight, and responded in rapid Italian that was far too complex for him to follow. But it did not matter. They were communicating. As September turned to October and the aspen trees on the mountains blazed gold, Mitchell and Bianca fell into a comfortable rhythm. He would rise before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, and she would have breakfast ready when he came in. They would eat together, practicing their respective languages, correcting each other's pronunciation with increasing familiarity. During the day, while Mitchell worked the ranch, Bianca maintained the house and began putting up preserves for winter, a skill she had learned from her mother. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit by the fireplace. Mitchell would read aloud from the Italian storybook, stumbling over pronunciations, and Bianca would gently correct him. Then she would read from her English primer, and he would do the same for her. Sometimes they would simply talk, a mixture of broken Italian and broken English, using gestures to fill in the gaps, sharing stories of their lives. Mitchell learned that Bianca loved to sing, that she had a beautiful voice and knew dozens of Italian folk songs. She learned that Mitchell had a gift with horses, that he was patient and kind with animals in a way he struggled to be with people. He learned that she missed her homeland terribly, the hills of Tuscany, the olive groves, the way the light fell on the old stone buildings. She learned that he had been lonely for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone to talk to. And slowly, carefully, they began to fall in love. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning strike of passion. It was gradual, built on morning coffees and shared meals, on Mitchell's determination to learn her language and Bianca's equal determination to learn his. It was in the way she would place her hand on his arm when she wanted his attention, the way he would bring her wildflowers when he came in from the range. It was in their patience with each other's mistakes and their celebration of small victories. By November, when the first snow dusted the mountains, Mitchell could hold basic conversations in Italian. His grammar was often wrong, his accent atrocious according to Bianca's amused corrections, but he could tell her about his day, ask about hers, and discuss plans for the ranch. Bianca's English had progressed even faster, perhaps because she was immersed in it more fully, and she could now express herself reasonably well, though she still struggled with complex ideas. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mitchell gathered his courage. He had been rehearsing this in his mind for days, checking and rechecking his Italian grammar book to make sure he got the words right. "Bianca," he began in Italian, "when you came here we were strangers. I sent for a wife, but I did not know what that truly meant. I thought I was lonely before, but now I realize I was only alone. Loneliness is what I would feel if you were not here." She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight, waiting for him to continue. "I know we married in name only, on paper, arranged by an agency," he continued, switching to English when his Italian failed him, but she understood enough now. "But I would like to ask you properly. Bianca, would you marry me? Not because an agency arranged it, not because you needed to escape Italy, but because we choose each other. Because I have come to care for you deeply, and I hope you might feel something for me as well." Bianca was silent for a long moment, and Mitchell's heart sank. He had misread the situation, had mistaken friendliness for something more, had foolishly hoped that she could love a rough rancher who was only just learning to speak her language. Then she smiled, a radiant smile that transformed her entire face, and she responded in careful English. "Mitchell, I was so frightened when I arrived. I thought I had made terrible mistake, coming so far to marry a stranger who I could not even talk to. But you showed me kindness. You gave me my own room, my own space. You did not demand anything of me. And then you did something no one else ever did. You learned my language. You worked so hard every night just so you could talk to me. How could I not fall in love with such a man? Mitchell felt something break open in his chest, a dam of emotion he had been holding back for months. He reached for her hand and she gave it willingly, her fingers lacing through his. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "Yes, Mitchell Turner, I will marry you, truly marry you." He drew her closer and she came willingly, settling against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his, hardly able to believe this was real. "I love you," he said in Italian, the words he had practiced until they were perfect. "I love you too," she replied in English, her accent making the words even sweeter. That night, Bianca did not return to her own room. Mitchell carried her up the stairs to his room, their room now, and they sealed their commitment to each other not as strangers bound by a contract, but as two people who had chosen each other, despite every obstacle. The next morning, Mitchell woke with Bianca in his arms, sunlight streaming through the window, and felt a happiness he had never imagined possible. She stirred against him, opening her eyes, and smiled sleepily. "Buongiorno," she murmured. "Good morning," he replied, kissing her forehead. They decided to have a proper wedding ceremony. The following Sunday, they spoke with Father Miguel, and he agreed to perform the service before the entire congregation. Bianca wanted to make a new dress for the occasion, and Mitchell took her to the general store where she selected fabric in cream-colored cotton with tiny flowers embroidered along the hem. Word spread through Durango about the Italian bride and the rancher who had learned her language, and the small community was charmed by the story. Women who had previously been curious about Bianca now reached out to her, inviting her to their sewing circles and church groups. Bianca's English improved rapidly with more social interaction, and she began to make friends. One of these was Clara Patterson, the wife of a neighboring rancher. Clara was a warm, motherly woman in her 40s who spoke a little French from her own background, and she took Bianca under her wing. Through Clara, Bianca learned more about running a ranch household in Colorado, about preserving food for the harsh winters, about the local customs and expectations. Mitchell, too, found that his life expanded beyond the ranch. Other men in town, seeing his dedication to learning Italian, sought his advice on their own relationships. One young cowhand was courting a Mexican girl, and Mitchell encouraged him to learn Spanish, to show her that her language and culture mattered. The advice was well received, and Mitchell found himself becoming something of a local authority on marriage, which amused him to no end. Their wedding day arrived on a crisp December morning. The church was packed with neighbors and friends, many of whom had helped Bianca prepare for the occasion. She walked down the aisle without a father to give her away, but Clara walked beside her, serving as both mother and friend. Bianca's dress was simple but beautiful, and she had woven wildflowers into her hair, preserved carefully from summer. Mitchell stood at the altar in his best suit, freshly pressed and probably not worn since he had bought it years ago. He could not take his eyes off Bianca as she approached. She was radiant, her face glowing with joy, and when she took his hand, he felt the rightness of this moment deep in his bones. Father Miguel performed the ceremony in both English and Italian, allowing them both to make their vows in their native tongues. Mitchell promised to love and cherish Bianca, to honor her language and her heritage, to be her partner and friend. Bianca promised to stand by Mitchell, to build a life with him in this new land, to love him all the days of her life. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell kissed Bianca before the entire congregation, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, not strangers brought together by circumstance, but partners who had chosen each other. The reception was held in the church hall, and the community had come together to provide food and music. Bianca had taught some of the local women to make Italian dishes, and the tables were laden with both traditional Colorado fare and Italian specialties. There was dancing and laughter, and Mitchell, who had never been much for social events, found himself enjoying every moment. As the evening wound down, Clara pulled Bianca aside. Mitchell watched from across the room as the older woman spoke seriously to his wife, and Bianca listened intently, nodding. When they embraced, Bianca was crying, and Mitchell wondered what had been said. "On the wagon ride home?" he asked, and Bianca explained in her accented but now quite competent English. "Clara told me that I am blessed to have found you, but that you are equally blessed to have found me. She said that a marriage where both people work to understand each other, where both people value what the other brings, is a rare and precious thing. She said her own marriage is good, but she and her husband, they never tried to learn what matters to the other. They just expected each other to fit into their own worlds. But we, Mitchell, we built a new world together, one that has room for both Italian and English for both of our histories." Mitchell reached over and took her hand. "Clara is a wise woman." "She is," Bianca agreed. "She also told me about certain things that might happen now that we are truly married, things about how babies are made." Mitchell nearly drove the wagon off the road. "She what?" Bianca laughed at his expression. "I told her we were already sharing a bed, that I did not need that particular advice, and she laughed very hard. She said you were clearly a good husband in all ways." Mitchell felt his face heat. "You told her that, Mitchell?" she asked. "I could not lie in a church." He laughed then, unable to help himself, and Bianca joined in. They laughed until tears ran down their faces, until the wagon rattled into the ranch yard and the horses looked back at them as if questioning their sanity. That winter was the happiest of Mitchell's life. Snow blanketed the ranch, and while the work was hard, keeping the cattle fed and the water sources clear, coming home to Bianca each evening made every struggle worthwhile. The house was warm and filled with the smells of her cooking, and she always greeted him with a kiss and a smile. They continued their language lessons, though now it was more for the pleasure of sharing their cultures than out of necessity. Mitchell could speak Italian with reasonable fluency, though Bianca still laughed at some of his more creative grammatical choices. Bianca's English was excellent, with only the occasional word that eluded her, usually something highly specific to ranching. In February, Bianca began to feel unwell in the mornings. Mitchell was concerned and wanted to fetch the doctor from town, but Bianca stopped him with a shy smile. "I do not need a doctor," she said. "I need a midwife perhaps in 7 or 8 months." Mitchell stared at her, the meaning of her words sinking in slowly. "You are pregnant?" "Yes," she said, her smile growing wider. "We are going to have a baby." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen until she begged him to stop, laughing and protesting that it made her nausea worse. He set her down carefully, then immediately worried that he had been too rough, that spinning had been a terrible idea. "I am fine," she assured him, cupping his face in her hands. "I am strong, Mitchell. I will be fine, and our baby will be fine." "Our baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." The months of Bianca's pregnancy were a time of preparation and anticipation. Mitchell built a cradle from oak, carving it carefully in the evenings while Bianca sewed tiny clothes. Clara and the other women came to visit regularly, bringing advice and gifts, helping Bianca prepare for motherhood. Mitchell found himself talking to the unborn baby, alternating between English and Italian, telling stories about the ranch and about Italy, a place he had never seen but knew intimately through Bianca's memories. She would place his hand on her growing belly so he could feel the baby kick, and each time he felt that flutter of movement, he was overcome with emotion. As summer arrived and Bianca's due date approached, Mitchell became increasingly anxious. He had sent for the midwife, a competent woman named Mrs. Henderson who lived in town, and she had agreed to come stay at the ranch as Bianca's time drew near. But what if something went wrong? What if he lost Bianca, this woman who had become his entire world? Bianca seemed to sense his fears. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, she took his hand. "Mitchell, I know you are worried, but women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy and strong. Mrs. Henderson is experienced. Everything will be all right." "I cannot lose you," he said quietly. "You are everything to me, Bianca. I did not know what love was before you came here." "You will not lose me," she said firmly. "I did not come all the way from Italy just to leave you now. I have too much to live for. You, this baby, the life we are building together. I will be here, Mitchell. I promise." The baby came on a warm July evening in 1883, almost exactly a year after Bianca had arrived in Colorado. The labor was long and difficult, and Mitchell spent most of it pacing outside the bedroom where Mrs. Henderson and Clara attended to Bianca. He could hear her cries of pain, and each one was like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be with her, but the women had firmly shut him out, insisting this was women's work. Finally, as the sun was rising the next morning, a new sound pierced the air. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. Mitchell froze, hardly daring to breathe until Mrs. Henderson opened the door with a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Turner. You have a son." Mitchell pushed past her into the room. Bianca lay in the bed, exhausted and pale but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached slowly, almost afraid, until Bianca looked up at him with shining eyes. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Mitchell sat on the edge of the bed, and Bianca placed the baby in his arms. He looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled with a shock of dark hair. The baby's eyes were closed, but as Mitchell watched, they opened, dark blue and unfocused, looking up at him. "He is perfect," Mitchell whispered, his voice breaking. "You are perfect. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" Bianca asked. They had discussed names throughout her pregnancy, debating between Italian and English options. Now, looking at his son, Mitchell knew what felt right. "Marco," he said. "Marco Turner. An Italian name for his mother's heritage, but with my name to show he belongs to both worlds." Bianca's eyes filled with tears. "Marco, yes, it is perfect." Clara and Mrs. Henderson left them alone with their son. And for a long time, Mitchell and Bianca simply sat together, marveling at the new life they had created. Marco slept peacefully in his father's arms, unaware that he represented the full joining of two cultures, two languages, two people who had found each other against all odds. The first months of Marco's life were exhausting but joyful. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs, and he kept his parents awake at all hours with his demands to be fed, changed, and held. Mitchell had never imagined he would take such joy in the mundane tasks of fatherhood, but he found himself eager to help with everything. He would walk the floor with Marco when the baby was fussy, singing half-remembered lullabies in both English and Italian, making up words when he forgot the real ones. Bianca proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even when exhausted. She nursed Marco while sitting in the rocking chair Mitchell had bought specially for her, singing the same songs her mother had sung to her in Italy. Mitchell would watch them, his wife and his son, and feel a contentment he had never thought possible. As Marco grew from an infant to a toddler, it became clear he would grow up truly bilingual. Bianca spoke to him primarily in Italian, while Mitchell used English, and the boy seemed to understand both equally well. His first word was mama, but his second was da, and he used both with equal frequency. The ranch prospered during these years. Mitchell had always been a good rancher, but with Bianca managing the house and helping with the accounts, things ran even more smoothly. She had a head for numbers that Mitchell lacked, and she organized his finances in a way that allowed them to expand their herd and improve their property. They added a barn, repaired fences, and even hired a young cowhand named Jimmy to help with the daily work. Bianca also began a small garden where she grew vegetables and herbs from seeds she had brought from Italy. The garden flourished, and she used the produce to create meals that were the talk of Durango. She began selling her preserves and sauces in town, and they became so popular that the general store offered to carry them regularly. It was a small business, but it was hers, and Mitchell was proud of her entrepreneurial spirit. When Marco was 3 years old, Bianca announced she was pregnant again. This time, Mitchell was less anxious, having been through it before, though he still worried. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and when Bianca went into labor on a cool October evening, Mrs. Henderson was already at the ranch, visiting to check on things. The labor was shorter this time, and when Mitchell was finally allowed into the bedroom, he found Bianca nursing a tiny baby with a full head of dark hair. "Another boy?" he asked. "No," Bianca said with a smile. "A girl." "We have a daughter, Mitchell." He looked at his daughter, so small and perfect, and felt his heart expand even further. "What shall we name her?" "I would like to name her Rosa," Bianca said. "For my mother." "Rosa Turner," Mitchell said, trying out the name. "It is beautiful, like her mother." Marco was initially skeptical about the new baby who took up so much of his mother's attention, but he soon became fascinated with his little sister. He would sit beside Bianca while she nursed Rosa, chattering to the baby in a mix of Italian and English, telling her about the ranch and the horses and the mountains. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The house was louder, messier, and more chaotic than ever before, but it was filled with life and love. Mitchell would come in from a hard day's work to find Marco trying to teach Rosa to walk, even though she was still far too young, or Bianca singing in the kitchen while both children played at her feet. Years passed in this way, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Marco grew tall and strong, taking after his father in build but having his mother's dark coloring. Rosa was smaller and more delicate, but she had a fierce spirit that reminded Mitchell of Bianca's determination when she had first arrived, alone and frightened but unwilling to give up. Both children grew up speaking both languages fluently, though they primarily used English when playing together and Italian when talking with their mother. Mitchell continued to practice his Italian, and while he would never lose his accent, he became quite proficient. He could read Italian newspapers that Bianca ordered from Denver, could write letters to her brother and his family in Italy, and could carry on complex conversations without difficulty. The community in Durango had fully accepted the Turner family. Bianca was active in the church and the women's society, and she had become known for her generous spirit and her willingness to help newcomers to the area, particularly those who spoke little English. She never forgot what it was like to arrive in a strange land without the ability to communicate, and she made it her mission to ensure no one else felt that isolation. Mitchell, too, had become a respected figure in the community. His ranch was one of the most successful in the area, and he was known as a fair man who treated his workers well and his animals humanely. He served on the town council and helped mediate disputes, bringing to these tasks the same patience and willingness to understand that had served him so well in his marriage. When Marco turned 10 and Rosa 7, they began attending the school in Durango. It was a small schoolhouse with one teacher for all grades, but it provided a solid education. Both children excelled, particularly in reading and writing, benefiting from their bilingual upbringing. The teacher, Miss Sarah Morton, was impressed by their ability to translate between languages and often had them help when new students arrived from non-English-speaking families. One evening, when the children were in bed, Bianca and Mitchell sat on the porch as they often did, watching the stars come out over the mountains. It had been 8 years since their wedding, nearly 9 since Bianca had arrived, and Mitchell still sometimes marveled at the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Leaving Italy, coming here," Bianca looked at him in surprise. "Regret it?" "Mitchell, how could I regret the best decision I ever made? You gave up so much," he said. "Your homeland, your language, your family." "I did not give up my language," she corrected with a smile. "You learned it, remember, and I gained a new homeland, a new family. Yes, I miss Italy sometimes. I miss my brother and his children. I miss the hills and the olive trees, but I would not trade what I have here for anything." "We could visit," Mitchell said thoughtfully. "Italy, I mean. We have been doing well with the ranch. We could afford the trip." "The children should know where their mother came from." Bianca's eyes widened. "You would do that? Travel all the way to Italy? For you, yes, and for Marco and Rosa. They should know both sides of their heritage." Tears filled Bianca's eyes, and she moved closer to him on the bench, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You are a good man, Mitchell Turner, the best man I have ever known." Planning the trip to Italy took over a year. They needed to arrange for someone to manage the ranch while they were gone, save enough money for the journey, and coordinate with Bianca's brother, Antonio, who was thrilled at the prospect of finally meeting his sister's family. In the spring of 1891, when Marco was 11 and Rosa 8, the Turner family boarded a train in Durango bound for New York, and from there, a ship to Italy. It was Marco and Rosa's first time leaving Colorado, and they were wide-eyed with wonder at everything they saw. The Atlantic crossing took 2 weeks, and while Bianca and Rosa suffered from seasickness, Mitchell and Marco spent hours on deck, watching the endless ocean. Mitchell had never been on a ship before, and he found the vastness of the sea both terrifying and exhilarating. When they finally reached Italy and traveled to Tuscany, Bianca wept openly at the sight of the landscape she had not seen in nearly a decade. Antonio met them in Florence with his wife and children, and there was much crying and embracing. Mitchell felt somewhat out of place, the rough American rancher among Bianca's refined Italian family, but Antonio clasped his hand warmly. "You are the man who made my sister happy," Antonio said in halting English. "You are family." They spent a month in Italy, staying at Antonio's home and visiting all the places that had been important in Bianca's childhood. Mitchell saw the house where she had grown up, the church where she had been baptized, the olive groves where she had played as a child. He met distant relatives and family friends, all of whom wanted to meet the American who had learned Italian for love. Marco and Rosa were fascinated by everything, from the ancient buildings to the different foods to their Italian cousins who showed them around with pride. Mitchell watched his children playing in the Italian countryside and realized that this trip was important for more than just Bianca's nostalgia. It was connecting his children to a heritage that was part of who they were. One evening, he and Bianca walked alone through the olive grove on Antonio's property. The sun was setting, turning everything golden, and cicadas sang in the trees. "Thank you for this," Bianca said quietly, "for bringing me home, even if just for a little while." "This is your first home," Mitchell said, "but Colorado is your home now too. Both can be true." "Yes," she agreed, "both are true. And someday, perhaps our children will bring their families here and they will teach their children about both homes, both languages, both parts of who they are." When they returned to Colorado, the ranch seemed almost foreign for a few days, so different from the ancient landscape of Italy. But it did not take long for things to feel familiar again. This was home, Mitchell realized. Not because of the land or the house, but because this was where he and Bianca had built their life together. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children's lives. Marco grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, but with a gentleness that came from his mother. He took to ranching naturally, and by the time he was 16, he was Mitchell's right hand in running the property. But he also had an artistic side, inherited perhaps from Italian ancestors, and he liked to sketch the landscape and the animals in a journal he kept. Rosa grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's features and her father's determination. She was fiercely intelligent and announced at 15 that she wanted to become a teacher like Miss Morton. Bianca and Mitchell supported this ambition fully, even though it was not common for women to pursue education beyond what was necessary to run a household. When Rosa was 18, she left for the teacher's college in Denver. It was difficult for Bianca to see her daughter go, but she was proud too. Mitchell understood this mixture of emotions, having felt something similar when his own children had started school. The act of watching your children grow up in a way was both joyful and painful. Marco, now 20, showed no signs of wanting to leave the ranch. He had courted a few girls in Durango, but nothing serious had developed. He seemed content to work alongside his father, gradually taking on more responsibility as Mitchell grew older. One evening, as Mitchell and Marco were repairing a fence line, Marco spoke up hesitantly. "Father, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Mitchell said, hammering in a post. "How did you know that mother was the right woman for you? I mean, you could not even talk to each other at first. How did you know?" Mitchell paused in his work, considering the question. "I did not know, not at first. I was terrified when she arrived and I realized we could not communicate." "But she had courage, Marco. She had come so far, risked so much. And I realized that if she could be that brave, I could be brave too. I could learn her language, try to understand her world. And as I got to know her, I realized she was everything I had ever wanted. Someone strong and kind and determined. Someone who made me want to be a better man." Marco nodded slowly. "I met someone," he admitted. "Her name is Catherine Morrison. Her family just moved here from Kansas, and I think she is special, Father. But I am not sure if she feels the same way." Mitchell smiled. "Then do what I did with your mother. Show her through your actions. Be patient. Be kind. Be someone worth loving." Marco did exactly that, courting Catherine with a patience and determination that would have made his father proud. By Christmas of that year, he asked her to marry him, and she accepted. The wedding was held the following spring, and it was a grand affair that united two well-respected families in the Durango community. Bianca cried through the entire ceremony, and Mitchell held her hand, remembering their own wedding all those years ago. How far they had come from those early days of gestures and broken communication. Marco and Catherine built a house on the ranch property, not far from the main house, and it was clear they would stay and help run the operation. Mitchell was pleased. The ranch would continue, passed down to the next generation, and his son would have the life of purpose and family that Mitchell had found. Rosa returned from Denver as a certified teacher and was immediately offered a position at the Durango school. She accepted, and Miss Morton, who was now quite elderly, began training Rosa to eventually take over as head teacher. Rosa lived at home, enjoying being back with her family after 2 years away. When Rosa was 22, she met a young lawyer named David Prescott, who had recently established a practice in Durango. David was educated and kind, and he shared Rosa's passion for learning. They married after a brief courtship, and David built them a house in town, near the school where Rosa taught. Mitchell found himself in his early 50s with both children married and settled, and he looked back on his life with satisfaction. The lonely rancher who had sent for a mail-order bride had become a husband, father, and now father-in-law to good people. The woman who had arrived speaking no English had become the heart of their family and community. But life, Mitchell knew, was not static. It continued to bring changes and challenges. When Bianca was 45, she became ill. It started as fatigue that she dismissed as simply getting older, but it progressed to pain and weakness that could not be ignored. The doctor from Durango examined her, and his face was grave. He called Mitchell outside to speak privately. "It is cancer, Mr. Turner, in her abdomen. I am sorry, but there is nothing I can do. We can make her comfortable, but you should prepare yourself." Mitchell felt the world tilt beneath him. How long? 6 months, perhaps a year if she is strong. He returned to Bianca's bedside, and she took one look at his face and knew. "It is bad, is it not?" Mitchell could not lie to her. He had never lied to her, not in all their years together. "Yes, the doctor says it is cancer." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with that same determination he had seen when she first arrived. "Then we will make the most of whatever time I have left." And they did. Bianca continued to live as fully as possible for as long as her body allowed. Marco and Catherine visited almost daily, often bringing their young daughter, Elena. Rosa came every weekend from town with David. The house was full of family and love, exactly as Bianca had always wanted. As her condition worsened, Bianca spent more time in bed, but she never complained. Mitchell sat with her for hours, reading to her in Italian, reminiscing about their years together, planning for the future even though they both knew she would not be part of it. One afternoon, when autumn had turned the aspen trees gold once again, Bianca asked Mitchell to take her outside. He carried her to the porch, settling her in the rocking chair with blankets wrapped around her frail body. She had lost so much weight, become so fragile, but to Mitchell she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "You remember the day I arrived?" she asked, her voice weak but clear. "Every detail," Mitchell said. "You stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified, and when I tried to greet you, you answered in Italian, and I had no idea what you were saying." She smiled. "I was asking if you were the man I was supposed to marry, and if you were disappointed in me." "I was never disappointed in you," Mitchell said, taking her hand. "Not for a single moment." "You changed your whole life for me," Bianca said. "You learned a new language just so we could talk to each other. Do you know how extraordinary that is? Most men would have expected me to simply adapt, to change myself to fit into their world. But you met me halfway. You valued me enough to enter my world too." "Learning Italian was the easiest thing I ever did," Mitchell said. "Loving you was even easier." "I am so grateful," Bianca whispered, "for every moment we had together, for our children, our grandchildren, for this life we built. I have no regrets, Mitchell, none." "Neither do I," he said, his voice breaking. Bianca died 3 days later on a quiet October morning with Mitchell holding her hand, and all her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were in Italian, telling Mitchell she loved him, and he responded in kind, his accent still imperfect after all these years, but the sentiment clear. The funeral was held at the church where they had married, and it seemed the entire town of Durango turned out to pay their respects. Bianca had touched so many lives through her kindness and generosity. Father Miguel, now quite elderly himself, performed the service in both English and Italian, just as he had done at their wedding. Mitchell felt as though part of him had been torn away. For over 20 years, Bianca had been his partner, his love, his everything. The house felt empty without her, even though Marco and Catherine visited constantly and Rosa came whenever she could. The first months after her death were the hardest. Mitchell went through the motions of running the ranch, but his heart was not in it. He would find himself looking for Bianca, expecting to see her in the kitchen or hear her singing. The silence was unbearable. One evening, Marco sat down with his father after supper. "Father, you need to let yourself grieve. You do not have to be strong all the time." "I am fine," Mitchell said automatically. "No, you are not," Marco said gently. "I see how you look at Mother's empty chair, how you hesitate before entering your bedroom because she is not there. It is all right to be sad, Father. It is all right to miss her." Mitchell looked at his son, this young man who had his mother's wisdom, and felt tears finally come. He had been holding them back, thinking he needed to be strong for his children, but Marco was right. He needed to grieve. He cried that night for the first time since Bianca died, great wrenching sobs that came from deep within. Marco held his father and let him weep, and when the tears finally subsided, Mitchell felt something release in his chest. "Thank you," he told his son. "That is what family is for," Marco replied. Slowly, painfully, Mitchell learned to live without Bianca. It never became easy, but it became bearable. He found comfort in his grandchildren, in watching Alina grow and then welcoming more grandchildren as Rosa had her first child, a son named Michael. He found purpose in teaching Marco the finer points of ranching, ensuring the family business would continue. He found peace in visiting Bianca's grave, where he would sit and talk to her in Italian, telling her about the family and the ranch and how much he missed her. Years passed. Mitchell grew older, his hair turning white, his body slowing down. But he remained sharp-minded and involved in the ranch operations, even as Marco took over more of the daily management. When Mitchell was 67, he had a heart attack while out checking on the cattle. Marco found him and got him back to the house, and the doctor came, but they all knew it was serious. Mitchell survived, but he was weak and confined to bed for weeks. Rosa came to stay at the ranch to help care for him, and one evening, as she sat beside his bed, Mitchell took her hand. "You are so much like your mother," he said, "strong and smart and kind." "I hope so," Rosa said. "She was the best person I ever knew." "Tell me something," Mitchell said. "Do you remember much Italian? I know you learned it as a child." "Yes, I still speak it with Marco and with Alina." "We did not want to lose that part of our heritage." Mitchell smiled. "Good, that is good. Your mother would be happy to know that." "Father, what made you decide to learn Italian?" Rosa asked. "I have always wondered." "It must have been so difficult, especially when you were already working so hard on the ranch." "It was not difficult," Mitchell said. "Or rather, the work was difficult, but the decision was easy. I loved your mother from almost the moment I met her. I could not bear the thought of living with her and not truly knowing her. And the only way to know her was to speak her language, to understand her world. It was the best decision I ever made, except for sending for her in the first place." Rosa wiped tears from her eyes. "That is beautiful, Father. You gave Mother the greatest gift anyone can give another person, the gift of being fully seen and understood. Mitchell thought about that after Rosa left the room. Yes, that was what he had tried to do. To see Bianca, to understand her, to value her for who she was rather than expecting her to simply become what he wanted. And in return, she had done the same for him. She had adapted to life in Colorado while never losing her Italian identity. They had created something new together, a marriage that honored both their backgrounds. Mitchell recovered from the heart attack, though he never regained his full strength. He spent his remaining years enjoying his family, watching his grandchildren grow, and taking satisfaction in the legacy he and Bianca had built together. On a warm summer evening, just after his 70th birthday, Mitchell sat on the porch watching the sunset. Marco was there with Catherine and their 3 children. Rosa had come from town with David and their 2 sons. The porch was full of family, full of life and laughter and love. Marco was teaching his youngest daughter a song in Italian, the same lullaby Bianca used to sing. Mitchell listened to the words, remembering Bianca's voice, and smiled. "Tell them about her," Mitchell said suddenly, and everyone turned to look at him. "Tell them about their grandmother, about the brave woman who came all the way from Italy to marry a stranger." And so they did, all of them contributing memories. Rosa talked about her mother's cooking and her generous spirit. Marco spoke of how she had taught him to appreciate beauty in everyday things. The grandchildren shared their memories of a grandmother who made them feel special and loved. Mitchell added his own stories, about the day Bianca arrived and they could not understand each other, about the long nights of studying Italian by lamplight, about their proper wedding ceremony, about the joy of building a life together despite every obstacle. As the stars came out and the family finally dispersed to their respective homes, Marco helped his father inside. Mitchell settled into bed, feeling a deep contentment. He had lived a good life. He had loved deeply and been loved in return. His children were happy and settled. His grandchildren would carry forward the legacy of 2 cultures united by love. That night, Mitchell dreamed of Bianca. She was young again, as she had been when she first arrived, standing by the stagecoach in that blue traveling dress. But this time when he approached her, she smiled without fear. This time when she spoke, he understood every word. "I have been waiting for you," she said in Italian. "I am here now," he replied in the same language. She took his hand, and together they walked into a future that held no more goodbyes. Mitchell Turner died peacefully in his sleep that night, 70 years old, and surrounded by the love that had defined his life. He was buried beside Bianca in the churchyard in Durango, and on his headstone, his children had words carved in both English and Italian. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he learned love's language. The ranch continued, passed down through generations of Turners who never forgot the story of their grandparents. The mail-order bride who arrived speaking no English, and the lonely rancher who learned her language in 3 months. Marco's children told the story to their children, and those children told it to theirs, keeping alive the memory of a love that transcended language and culture. Elena, Marco's oldest daughter, eventually wrote down the family history, creating a detailed account of Mitchell and Bianca's life together. The manuscript was passed down through the family, a treasured heirloom that reminded each generation of the power of love, patience, and the willingness to meet someone in their own world. The ranch itself flourished, growing from Mitchell's modest operation into one of the most successful in Colorado. But more importantly, it remained a place of family, where Italian was still spoken alongside English, where Bianca's recipes were still cooked, and where the story of how it all began was told and retold with pride. In Durango, The Turner family became legendary, not for their wealth or their land holdings, but for the love story that had founded their dynasty. The tale of Mitchell learning Italian to communicate with his bride became a local legend, told to newcomers as an example of what real love looked like. The church where Mitchell and Bianca had married became a popular spot for weddings, with many couples requesting the ceremony be performed in two languages as a nod to the Turner tradition. Father Miguel's successor and his successor after that all learned to perform bilingual ceremonies, honoring the legacy of Colorado's most famous mail-order bride marriage. The house Mitchell built still stood generations later, carefully maintained by his descendants. The bedroom where Bianca first stayed, the kitchen where they practiced their language lessons, the porch where they sat together for countless evenings, all were preserved as a testament to their love. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Bianca arrived in Colorado, the Turner family gathered at the ranch. They cooked Italian food using her recipes, sang the songs she taught them, and told the story once more. The story of a young woman brave enough to cross an ocean for a new life, and a man patient enough to meet her halfway. The story of how love could bridge any divide, overcome any obstacle if both people were willing to try. It was a story that never grew old, because at its heart was a truth that transcended time and place. That real love means seeing another person truly, understanding them fully, and valuing them enough to enter their world even as they enter yours. That marriage at its best is not one person adapting to another, but two people creating something new together, something that honors both their histories while building toward a shared future. Mitchell and Bianca Turner had lived that truth every day of their marriage, and in doing so, they had created not just a family, but a legacy that would endure for generations. A legacy that proved that language barriers, cultural differences, and initial misunderstandings are no match for patience, determination, and love. Their story became more than just family history. It became a symbol of hope for anyone who felt like they did not fit, for anyone who had left their homeland seeking a better life, for anyone who believed that love could conquer all obstacles. In Durango and beyond, people told the story of the Italian bride and the rancher who learned her language, and in telling it, they kept alive the memory of two remarkable people who had shown the world what love truly means. And so the story lived on, passed from generation to generation, a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of understanding, and the magic that happens when two people choose to build a life together, one word, one day, one moment of connection at a time. Mitchell and Bianca Turner had given their descendants not just land or wealth, but something far more precious. They had given them an example of what marriage could be, what love should look like, and what it means to truly know another person. That legacy, more than anything else they left behind, was their greatest gift, and it would endure as long as their story continued to be told.